Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Peter Ling, who runs the Smart Betting Club. Pete, thank you very much for coming on. The Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by the Betfair Hub from Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you want expert articles from pro punters, from building automated models to betting psychology, check out the Betfair Hub. betfair.com.au/hub. Gamble responsibly. Today I'm joined by Peter Ling, who runs the Smart Betting Club. Pete, thank you very much for coming on.
Hi Jake, it's great to be invited back on. Looking forward to getting into some of the topics that we haven't spoken about since the first podcast we did.
Yeah, it's been probably a couple of years now since we last spoke, and I know plenty of people loved hearing from you last time, so I'm excited to have you back on, and I figure it might be a good place to start just to give us a refresher on the Smart Betting Club. And I know plenty of people have probably seen it and been to the site and so on and used the tools and services that you offer. But if you don't mind, just spend a couple of minutes telling us about that and maybe how it might have even changed over the last couple of years since we last spoke.
I think the main change since we last spoke is the name change. We probably were the Secret Betting Club back then. That was heralded back to an old name that we had, and the kind of name Secret had long. I used to get messages saying, "You realise it's not a secret anymore?" I was like, "Yes, you're the 50th person who's told me that." So yeah, we changed it to Smart Betting Club, just fitted in with what we try and do. In terms of what we do at Smart Betting Club, our main area of focus is on tipsters, so handicappers for American audience tipsters, and we independently review and evaluate and keep reporting back on their ongoing performance of tipsters. So if you're interested in that aspect, in finding people who are experts and who are making a profit from their betting and we're following, then you'll come to us and we give you the independent analysis. We don't take any, we don't use affiliate reviews, links, and so we don't take a cut from writing our reviews. And we're funded by our members, so it helps us to present a well-rounded independent viewpoint. And alongside doing all this stuff on the tipster world, our remit has expanded in recent years. So we focus on anything that impacts people who bet or try and bet shrewdly. So it could be bookmakers, it could be some of the fundamentals like staking plans, betting banks, anything and everything that factors in and impacts people who bet. So that's part of what we look at the moment. So the primary work is tipster stuff, but then if you're interested in anything to do with anything to do with the sharper side of the betting fence, if you like, then that's something we also cover.
What level or what breadth do you have now in terms of verified possibilities for your members in terms of tipsters across different sports? Is it 10 sports? Is it 25 sports? Is it honing in on some of the soccer around the world and maybe some of the big four US sports and so on? Or what type of coverage do you have across different sports?
So the main areas of influence, main membership for members numbers comes from Europe. So a lot of the focus is on European areas of interest. So there is a growing number of people interested in the big four sports in the States, but there isn't as many tipsters that we cover. So the majority of sports that we cover are things like UK and Irish horse racing, and then certainly football. Soccer is a really big sport, very difficult nut to crack. But some of the tipsters I do see are very niche and specialist, getting into certain leagues or certain very granular into like second division of Spain or something like that. And then we also see a lot more on golf, and there's always tennis and cricket and a few other sports, but I would say the main few are horse racing, football, golf, and maybe tennis as well. I do want to expand further into some of the American sports, but there's a lot to explore on that front. There's so many different tipsters and so many different considerations to get into. So that's a slow burner at the moment on that front.
What about 2020 and COVID? Did that have any impact on the tipster world in some strange way? I don't really have a clear direction with this question other than were there things that popped up throughout that time for the business and Smart Betting Club that were interesting or unique, or were there more table tennis handicappers popping up and that type of thing?
I think there was. We didn't really cover anyone betting on Belarusian second division or table tennis in South Korea or whatever it might have been, because I mean, that's just kind of feeding a narrative where people bet because they want to bet and they need to bet, rather than actually placing a value bet, a shrewd bet, if you like. So
Yeah.
unless you're a specialist in some of these markets, then don't bother getting involved with them unless you are very clear that you can spot an edge over the bookmaker. So yeah, it did have an impact. I think the impact was, obviously we had nothing to bet on for a couple of months, but the subsequent impact was more on the return to sport. So let's take a sport like horse racing. Again, it's a really popular sport for betting. You had 2.5 months with no racing, and that had a knock-on impact in terms of form going into June, July, August, and beyond, where you had horses that maybe hadn't had the runs across, in the few months prior to running like they should have had. They had stables where they didn't have horses going out and they were training, and all kinds of considerations. And again, the same for like football. The teams are not able to train properly, train in small groups. So it was very hard, I think, to judge form. And we saw a lot of variance, especially in June and July, a lot of strange results. I think there were some stats about the number of bigger price winners being much larger in terms of the proportion in the subsequent months to its return. So I think that's calmed down a little bit now, but that seemed to be the biggest issue. So in terms of, did you start straight away betting straight away upon sports return? I think the best approach was to wait, and I did speak to some people who waited before getting back involved with their betting, which is very difficult, because if you haven't bet for 2.5 months and that's your bread and butter, then while it's going on again, and you just sit there and say, I'm just going to ride this one out for another 2 months. It takes something to actually do that, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially on the horse racing side, because I was in Australia when the equine influenza hit, and I think it was, off the top of my head, it was probably 2006, 2007, something like that. And it was the same sort of thing. There was a big chunk of time with no horse racing, and gamblers are notorious, especially in horse racing, I would say, for not being able to take a day off, because there's always another race, there's always another horse to analyze, and that continues on basically forever, if you want to look at it that way. So it was an interesting period where you had that forced layoff of time if you're following a certain type of horse racing or even sports. And then you're right, the interesting variable of how COVID would impact return to sports and even crowds and crowd noise and home field advantage and all these different things. I'm guessing there may be an element for those shrewd punters out there who were looking at these things could potentially find an advantage or find a way to get back into it and maybe do things a little bit differently to the norm and try and capture some of the advantage that's out there because of the obvious change to the way things have always been done.
Yeah, I spoke to someone who's a football veteran about the number of goals that take place in games now, and they get into specific teams where potentially you'd have vociferous crowds behind them, and that forces them to go for a winner or keep playing until the 90th minute or extra time to score a goal. Whereas you may find teams will sit back and take a 2-0 win rather than try and pull a goal back, take a 2-0 loss rather than try and pull a goal back and keep going, or settle for a draw because there's no crowd to push them on. So he certainly had felt there'd been a change in the goal market. So adapting to that was important. So it's just something simple like over 2.5 goals is such a popular line. Instead of moving to the over 2 goals in Asian line. So if you get 2 goals, you get your stake back. So just to cover that kind of thing. So I think, talking to certain people in the industry and how they bet, there's these little nuanced changes that you have to be aware of, and you have to get a feel sometimes for, the change because of COVID. And then there'll probably be, again, I was speaking to someone the other day, like, how are you preparing for when crowds do come back? Do you think, you need to have an adjustment period again because, there'll be a swing to maybe where over 2.5 goals is the market to take again. So yeah, it's a challenging time for everyone, obviously, but from a betting point of view, some unique things that are cropping up that we've never had to confront before.
Yeah, certainly, and I think the markets themselves, I wanted to ask you if you've noticed much across the betting markets, because I've certainly seen with the nature of COVID and injury reports, let's say, where they have COVID, players listed as out for COVID or day-to-day or whatever they might say, quarantine periods for players who've been in close contact and all these types of things. It's it's kind of played around with the markets a fair bit on different sports, depending on how impactful it is and what the quarantine period looks like. But have you noticed much else other than that? Because I've certainly seen periods of time where you would expect markets to be up for team sports, and then that hasn't happened. Have there been any other impacts that you've noticed across betting markets around the world?
Probably, but nothing comes to mind at the moment. I do think the bookmakers are also trying to feel their way through this as well, because it's such an unknown situation. So I think as well we'll see. When we're a few years down the line, we may be able to look back and look at things and go, well, we've got a full data sample here. We can see what the pattern was like. But I haven't noticed anything else. I mean, at the end of this chat, I'll probably think of a few things, but nothing right now jumps to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do know some people that are treating this as, well, this is an advantage in my favor because I'm going to be able to pick up some of those things and capture, some of that hopefully edge that does exist, and they're going to be quickest to move and play around with some things. So it'll be interesting to see if that's prolonged into 2021 and how long, and then beyond, even right now. Like, I think the Australian Open tennis is a good example. Obviously, in Melbourne where I'm from, so I'm keeping an eye on some of that, but just the nature of travel, some of the discontent by the players, how they're going to actually get the tournament done, and all these types of things make it interesting. And obviously, like you said, it's a good point in terms of bookmakers. They're dealing with it just as much, and it's probably even more difficult for a bookmaking organization in many respects compared to a sole proprietor who might be picking up on some of these things and maybe getting a decent price about some tennis players in the Australian Open, or golf tournaments and all these other things where there's a hell of a lot happening in everyone's world.
Well, yeah, talk about golf there, and certainly I think we've seen some golfing events that went on during the summer and the autumn where where COVID was raging, and you've got players getting pulled out halfway through an event, and favourites pulling out the day before, or and it makes a dramatic impact. I think John Rahm's pulled out the one this week, but I'm not sure if that was due to COVID, but he was the favourite or one of the strong favourites. So, I suppose it's one of those considerations, unless such and such a player has got to self-isolate, or he's stuck in a hotel room for 2 weeks and he's been eating chocolate all day. I don't know if it's very hard to kind of to get a sense of where there's an edge on that. I think you just have to adapt and be very quick and very fluid. So when, if you are taking on a series of golf bets and the favourite drops out unexpectedly an hour before the start of the tournament, you need to be quick and be able to adjust accordingly.
So I was reading your article you released earlier in January about some tips for 2021, and I want to talk about a couple of those. And the first one that everyone struggles with, in my opinion, in the gambling world, and myself included, is as you put it, hiring the right experts. And it's something that I have talked to a number of people about, and the whole idea of tipsters and buying or paying for services and things like that. And I still maintain there are plenty of reasons why it's a good idea, and including, for myself, if I go back to Australia and want to go to Flemington or Rose Hill or Randwick and watch some horse races and have a few bets, I'd rather have an expert on my side to try and get me back to, break even or slight advantage with a bit of luck, rather than losing at the theoretical hold of some of those markets. But take me through that and just, some of the thoughts you had when putting that article together.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that when you come to evaluate tipsters, there are plenty of rogue sites out there. Some are more obvious than others. So if you get on social media, you find people that set up an account yesterday, or they'll set up 10 accounts and just drill down until they've got the one that's the most profitable, and you use that. So, it's simple tools like you could just avoid social media tipsters altogether, for example. But you're always going to get that in an unregulated world. And even in any industry, certainly more regulated ones, you're going to get good builders, bad builders, good lawyers, bad lawyers. And it's about doing your research, isn't it? You wouldn't get a guy in to build an extension to your house and just take the first person you came across on Google. You'd ask your friends, you'd ask your neighbors, you'd get recommendations, you would do your research online, you'd see what reviews they had, you'd see if there's any negative reviews. And it's similar to the tipster world. People would come to us to get that. And when it comes to hiring an expert, the people say, oh, you should never use tipsters, or you should always use tipsters, or you should never bet each way. You should always bet to win. And there's so many shades of grey in this. I can speak from experience. I know you can make a profit from using tipsters, and I see it firsthand all the time with the members of my service and the people I liaise with. But certainly there are people out there who struggled, and maybe they've just chosen the wrong ones. Maybe they've made some poor decisions and quit too early or staked badly. But with the right setup and with the right experts, you really can make a go of it. And betting is hard. Betting is very, very difficult to make a profit from. And you're up against the bookmaker who's got access to all the information that you don't have. They've got the time, the inclination to study it. They've got teams of people. They've got all the data that feeds it. They've got all the experience. They've got their overround. So you're up against that. So the idea that you can walk off the street and suddenly beat them, even if you've got a modicum of knowledge about the sport or betting, it's unrealistic. So there is no harm in choosing an expert to guide you, as you were saying, in Australia. And it's just a matter of being sensible and choosing somebody that is realistic, isn't going to. It's not like a guru that's a self-help guru or some kind of get-rich-quick scheme. And if you take that sensible, logical approach, it is profitable. So if people are listening and they've tried it and it's not worked for them, then I challenge them to think again and take a closer look at some of the experts we evaluate or some of the other ones out there. There's other sites that do what we do, and because I do think that with an open mind, it can make a difference.
One of the other points you talked about was dealing with the downswings and losing weeks and months and how to do that. And it's a point that comes up often, on this podcast with the psychology and mentality of being in gambling and dealing with that and all the mathematical possibilities that exist on certain outcomes and variants and stuff like that. Have you found any ways that are beneficial? I think, it's certainly something that is pretty personal. I think some people deal with it better than others and have different ways of coping and so on. And, trusting their process and what they've been able to do over a track record of time. Have you seen any of the people you've analyzed do it in certain ways, or is there anything specific that you might want to touch on when it comes to the topic of dealing with the downswings?
Well, I feel like an education of some simple, basic betting principles can really help, because if you don't understand value betting, if you don't understand some basic sequences, probability and the sequences and how the odds you strike a bet at can, affect you in terms of sequences and what you might expect, then you're going to struggle to handle losing runs. You can't put them into the perspective and context that they need. So I was speaking to someone else recently about this, and he said, actually, if you come in off the street and you don't really have any knowledge of it, it's not a big learning curve. You could learn it in a morning, a lot of these key concepts. And if you could get a grasp of what you can expect if you're placing bets at average odds of 5-1, what can you expect in terms of a bad sequence? And then you are prepared for when that bad sequence hits. People are far too focused on what they can make versus what they might lose at different times, and how they need a bankroll and how they need to be, how they need to approach it in terms of expectations. I follow several tipsters, and I don't watch the bets myself. I'm busy enough to not watch every horse race or football or golf event that's taking place, and I often get messages, have you seen this? I'm like, well, no, I'm doing something else, and because the event's going on and it's happening, but I don't need to watch it. I'm not selecting that bet. I'm not sat down and said, I'm going to back Lille today to beat Rennes in League One in France. I trust that the guys told me that Lille is a solid bet, are worth backing at those odds because they're value. And I don't need to watch that game and get frustrated by a 90th minute penalty that the striker for the team I want to win sends over the bar. So, so there's some of the tips I find, but I don't think it's too difficult to get some of these to become adapted to what you need to know to kind of handle sequences. It's just about having spending a bit of time and educating yourself on some key concepts. And I do find from experience dealing with other people that they can make a difference and make it a bit of a smoother ride at times.
Yeah, it's one of the things that just came to mind when you were describing that is whether or not it's, easy is not the right word, but just coping with a downswing if you're using a tipster or using an expert to help you with that. And it's funny, I'm sure many people invest in the stock market or use an intermediary or some other third party to help them with that. And when the stock market goes down, maybe they do, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't get the feeling that I need to pick up the phone and yell at the investment advisor because the stock market went down. It's just, that's the way the stock market works sometimes. And, maybe they did some stupid things in terms of allocations and all that sort of stuff, but hopefully you can deal with that in advance. But I don't know. Have you had much experience with people being more upset or less upset when they're using tipsters and experts to help them, or is it something that, you know, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into, you should be able to deal with it, as opposed to picking the horses yourself and losing versus using a tipster?
I think people are quicker to be more critical, certainly. Or if you say if you're flying in an airplane, you're that much nervous because you're not flying it than if you were driving in a car, and the percentage chances of you being in a car accident are so much greater than being in a plane crash. So it's this bias that you have where because you can't control, oh well, you can, you don't place the bet, but people do quicker to certainly to judge and put that pressure on to say, look, why is this losing run happening? And making it all about the tipster themselves and saying they're picking out bad bets when it's just variance. So unfortunately, I do find if people are picking it themselves, they're more likely to be self-critical and be analytical of it and go, why am I doing this? What am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? And go back over it and go, well, actually, if I had my time again, I would pick that same bet. It wasn't a bad bet because it lost. It was a good bet because it was a value price. You're not saying it's going to win. You're saying it's a value price that you've taken. So I do think that, to answer your question, certainly people are more critical if a tipster's advising.
So related to this, I think you did some research on some of these swings and bad runs and stuff like that, where you can have 20 plus, losing bets in a row. And depending on the approach of the expert, the tipster, the person who's behind it, that can be very normal, especially if they're aiming for longer price horses or all the different variations of approaches. Did you, going through that process and then sharing it and talking to people about it, what was the feedback, the understanding level like? Was it something that people grasp, or is it still one of those things where if you're signing up for an expert and they lose 11 in a row, 17 in a row, 25 in a row, whatever it is, that's part of the possibilities of outcomes?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do is education, and sometimes it's reiterating similar points, but with a different way of approaching it. And it's because I find bettors need that reinforcing on a regular basis. So when it comes to, for example, the topic of sequences, yes, I put out, it's got a decent amount of traction actually. I put out an article, I think it was in the start of December, and it focused on a recommended tips that's been going since 2000, I think, and made a profit in most years since then. Certainly have got a very good edge, and if you follow them the long term, you do quite well. And it was interesting because at the start of November, just taking November in isolation, their first 20, they did one bet a day, the first 26 bets all lost. So I think there was 2 non-runners. So the first 28 days, you had 26 losses, losers in sequence. And then the question was, would you still follow this tipster? Because as luck would have it, the next 5 bets all won. So 29th of November to the 2nd of December, they all won. And if you took it over the period of 31 bets, you made the profit of exactly, higher than you would imagine it would actually normally make. But the strike rate was spot on for what it made long term over, 20 years. So it's a really good an analysis of what can happen, because I find that people would quit too soon, and that's often the biggest barrier between success and failure. I could give 10 people a winning portfolio and then come back, let them go, say, go away, go and follow these guys, go and follow these tipsters, and this is what you stake. And then I'll come back 6 months later and maybe only 3 or 4 of them are still making it a success. A couple maybe broken even, and then maybe 3 or 4 are showing a loss. And often that's the biggest barrier, is people will quit too soon, a failure to understand these kind of sequences of what you can expect. Because 5 out of 31, it hit the strike rate of about 50%. And this long-term service had 1 in 7 bets win, but it doesn't mean every 7th bet will go on to win. It just means, if you have a big enough sample, that'll be, it's like flipping a coin, isn't it? You wouldn't expect 5 heads and 5 tails from the first 10 coin flips. And then you just need to do it enough time to get that, the strike rate to manifest itself. But yeah, it goes back to education, because if people understand and their expectations are realistic at the start, and they set up appropriately, so they set up with a bank to cover for, hey, a 26 losing run might well happen here, a bit longer could well happen. And if they have that in mind, I think they are that much more able to cope with it when those bad runs do hit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's hard to do in the moment, but obviously if you've either written down some of the guiding principles you have and why you're doing it, then it can certainly help. But have you found that many people that are looking in the direction of experts and tipsters, that they aren't really prepared and ready for that and understanding what can happen and what might happen and what does happen? And, you might need to get in early on the education, or what percentage of people do you think who go into the idea of hiring a tipster or an expert aren't capable yet of fully understanding what the possibilities look like?
Well, I think the majority of people wouldn't be familiar with that. No, whether it's their own betting or following tips, they wouldn't be expecting that, and that's why so many people struggle, because they have a failure to conceive what the strike rate of sequences may look like. Type of thing, should the betting be taught? Should it be kind of on the syllabus for I can't imagine it in a million Sundays. A month of Sundays kind of being on the educational syllabus, and how to bet and how to understand sequences. But it is something that most people don't grasp and don't understand, and that's why I make such a big song and dance about it and try and reiterate some of these key points, because even with the best will in the world, when you're in a bad run and you're having a tough time, you do sometimes need to fall back on reading articles like that, or talk to somebody who can say, hey, this is entirely normal. And that's something else I suggest to people is, if you're betting, certainly have an accountability partner. Whether you do that with somebody else, like you're betting with somebody else, or it's your wife, or it's your father, or it's somebody that you trust who's got the time to pull it apart and say, why have you made that decision? Why did you stop that? And why did you invest in that? You might do it for other walks of life, which are effectively betting, like the stock market. But you might not think to do it in betting. You might keep it to yourself. You might hide it away. It's pure betting, and it's not approved of by some people. So I think that having someone to bounce ideas off is another thing, because sometimes it just prevents you from making those emotional decisions. And let's face it, betting can be very emotional at times when money's involved and you're watching a race and your horse comes second for the 25th time. So
I wish it was on the syllabus, because I think there's so much to pick up and learn, and maybe it won't reach everyone, but I would hope it does, just so whenever a average person walks into the casino, they at least have some understanding of what's going to happen, or when the average person, gets on an airplane or gets in their car or just does general life stuff, they can understand what the outliers look like, what the possibilities are, and why the seemingly unlikely can fit well within a standard deviation of some of this stuff, because there's plenty of examples in life where people think it's strange or unusual or unique or something they could never possibly have imagined, and you just have to read the newspaper and you basically hear every year you hear that there's a once in 100-year storm or once in a 10-year storm, and you just have to laugh sometimes at just the basic concepts not resonating pretty well.
No, and I don't think to move on slightly, I don't think the betting industry is set up for that. They don't want people to know. If you look at the way bookmaking and bookmaker influence is pervasive across all forms of media, whether it's newspapers, whether it's printed media, whether it's online media, whether it's media organizations, or every football team's got an official betting partner. Every newspaper promotes certain bookmakers, so and it's in their interest. This is the way bookmaking is set up. They profit from your losses, so there's no incentive from so many sites that are driven by bookmaker revenue to give any kind of education or to help people. So it's not a surprise to see and to hear of so many people who are struggling to kind of understand some of these key concepts, because you have to dig around to go and find them.
Indeed, and it's a very large topic we cover, but I want to ask you about what's happening in the UK and the regulatory side, and often it can be a dry topic, but I do think it's important for everyone and could have longer lasting impacts on the industry in the UK, obviously, but I think more broadly. And we've certainly seen the ripple effect from some of these types of things in the past, whether it's been advertising, whether it's been sponsorship, problem gambling or responsible gambling, or whatever you want to call it on that front, where we've seen things be implemented in certain ways and places and then find themselves in other jurisdictions. So maybe as a starting point, just a high level sort of perspective from you on where things sit now, where they're at with respect to the regulations in the UK, some changes that have been thrown out there, and how they're obviously going to impact everyone in the industry?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, if you like, reviews going on at the moment. There's a high level gambling review from the UK government, so evaluating the Gambling Act and changes that might need to come in, including a review of the regulator, the Gambling Commission. And the Gambling Commission have their own review going on, and that's into interaction with customers from bookmakers. And that's the most interested probably listeners at the moment. It's going to be it's already, I've written about this recently. One of the topics is it's going to be looking into affordability caps. So you maybe can deposit anywhere from £100 to £2,000. There, the figure's been mooted, and lose that amount across all your bookmakers in a given month. And the reason for this, Jake, is there's a increase in what they call people with a gambling disorder, problem gambling. There's not so much an increase in the number of people who have this disorder, but the amount they're losing is increasing. So that's a high level overview of what's happening in the UK, and there's probably some parallels for what might happen in some other countries at the moment, in the future as well.
So going back a little bit, the fixed odds betting terminals, they changed the staking there. I think they changed it dramatically, and that's obviously had an impact. And has this been something that's been coming for a while, or it's been mooted or thrown out there for a fair bit of time? And as things have accelerated on the, let's say, commercial side broadly within the gambling industry, it's something that's obviously been pushed, and now it's come to the forefront? Or is your feeling that this is something that's been necessary, or it's been long awaited and it's finally here, or how has that sort of process happened?
So it's certainly been on the cards because of the structure of how bookmaking is. It's a very competitive industry, and player acquisition is expensive, retaining them is expensive, and all kinds of free bets, promotions, and things like best odds guaranteed, which make it very difficult for bookmakers to just turn a profit on traditional markets. So they're trying to drive more customers to play on the casino, play in online gaming, because there's a blurring of the lines between what's skilled betting, so placing a bet on horse racing and sports, versus placing a bet on an online slot or some kind of online casino like roulette, where you will lose money long term. And like I said, bookmaking is based on their profits are based on your losses, and the way it is at the moment with all these things considered, it's skewed toward the squeezing both ends. So they're squeezing the winners, they're closing those accounts, limiting them, and at the same time they're trying to get more profit from those losers, and they've made them VIPs so they could lose more and more. And the terminology is changing. There's no longer called VIPs, and there is some move and there's some changes afoot to try and protect people. But you have situations where people are allowed to lose far too much, and it's affecting lives, it's affecting livelihood, it's affecting all kinds of people, and it's driving news stories on that topic. So it's been a long time coming, and I do fear that, we're going to see some changes, but it could well be some kind of fudge, and it really won't get to the root cause of the problem, which is tackling the way that bookmaking is structured in the country, in the UK at the moment. So, I hope I'm wrong. I hope something fundamentally can change that, makes a proper impact, but I'm a bit fearful about what may come out, I'm afraid.
Do you think there's a chance that they'll lump everything in together? And what I mean by that is a casino will be treated the same as sports betting, as well as horse racing, where clearly you or I could spend hours and hours and hours going through all the data and putting together models and systems to try and beat horse racing. And whether that would happen is another question. But, in theory and in reality, it's with enough skill, you can beat those games, or you can be break even, or whatever you want to say, as opposed to RNG games, where obviously it's a casino type product. Is just the hold is the hold, and over enough spins or turns of the wheel, that's what's going to happen. Do you think we might have a scenario soon where some decision making groups will end up lumping everything together, and those who want to recreationally, semi-professionally, professionally, or anywhere in between bet on things like sports and horses where you can have an advantage will be negatively impacted?
Yeah, at the moment I can see that, and that's something I'm trying to help raise awareness of the need to differentiate, because there's evidence, the stats out there. I've seen the Gambling Commission's own stats and report on this that showcases how certain things like online casino gambling has a higher proportion of people who have a problem than, say, betting on horse racing. So it's in the bookmaker's interest to blur the lines because they don't want you to just bet on sports with them. They want really you to go and bet on these other areas. Open any bookmaker account, and you'll get emails promoting you to go and take a free bet here and there, and maybe occasional sports betting markets. But the majority of the time, they want you to go and have a free spin in the casino or go and try out this hot new arcade game. I don't do it myself, so I don't exactly know the specifics on it, but that's what they encouraging you to do. So there is a fear, that the baby could get thrown out with the bathwater, and because of this blurring of the lines and lumping both together, that they'll have limits across the board. Where if bookmakers can target very well, we've seen that in how they identify winners and potential winners. They can move and isolate them, and they know the markets that they have to be careful about, and the types of bets they have to be careful about. They can identify those. But equally, the same can be said for people who are more vulnerable to having a gambling disorder, and there's certain things that they can do specific to target that and to address it, rather than just a blanket issue across all types of betting. It should be very targeted using betting history and the information that bookmakers have to identify those with a problem and where they need to step in.
So do you think this will result in things getting better generally, or do you think it'll just be a bit of likely to be a stuff up of some kind in some way, shape or form, and it's going to be, a negative outcome? Because I know from experience in other markets, not necessarily the UK, but these things are hard, and the people involved aren't gamblers or gambling experts or understand the markets as well as, you do, and guests on the show have sort of articulated in the past. Is there any chance we get a positive outcome on this? Because my concern obviously is the impact in other places as well, and we don't necessarily want to see this permeate through different jurisdictions if it's not going to work out positively, especially for those that are trying to treat this as a business.
I'm on the fence. I don't really know what the outcome is going to be. It's early days, and this could take, it's the consultations are ongoing. It could take a long time. The wheels of change are quite slow to turn, I feel, on this front, and there could be yet more reviews to come in the future. But we had this, you mentioned the FOB teas. There was, bookmakers railed against that, and they tried very hard, but they were unsuccessful. And I'm fearful that they're going down the same route again. They're trying the same tactics. They're using a bit of misinformation, a fair bit of misinformation, to try and keep the status quo when, it's unsustainable at the moment, the way it's set up. So unless there's actual practical change that can make a difference, I am fearful that we might see change that impacts us all and isn't really that substantially, doesn't really make much of a difference, or the difference it could make. And certainly, you look at the markets like the US and European bookmakers coming over, and they're applying lots of similar practices there. So it wouldn't surprise me to see these issues unfold in time, especially in terms of people with a gambling disorder, if they're allowed to operate in the same vein.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And even the unintended consequences or indirect outcomes, or, the second order effects on some of this stuff, I think for the most part, when there's a tightening or a shrinking of what's being allowed or possible, or tightening of the regs, you can often see that passed along to the end user, which is, us gamblers, us customers at the end of the day. And that'll change pricing. That'll change the ability for a lot of those things to be possible, because these bookmakers, a lot of them now obviously are public companies and have the earnings calls and have all the challenges that come with operating those types of businesses. And if things get tighter and tougher, unfortunately, oftentimes you'll see that passed on to the punters.
Yeah, exactly. You can see that we will suffer the consequences of what comes out of this, and it's important that people have that their voice be known, and trying to empower people, encourage people to get involved on this, because if you don't do anything, you can't then complain if the rules that come in are detrimental to you, or you're not happy about them. So the more people that can, again, educate themselves, read about this, and give informed opinions, because like I say, there's consultations going on now. They are listening, but you do have to. You also mentioned not everyone in the decision halls of people making decisions on this. So whether it be the regulator or those in government, understand betting like many people listening to this will no doubt understand it. So it's also important to explain it in simple terms that they can understand and relate to. And then, another unintended consequence is certainly in the black market. You probably talk about this a lot more and have more experience being in the US, but obviously it's a big problem there. How do you, once the genie's out the bottle and people are betting into unregulated spaces, how do you then get them back in? It seems to be very difficult. And that's part of the fear about if you put these blanket limits across, which are people then going to take their betting and bet into unregulated spaces? And it's very hard to manage that, whether it be problem gambling or the lack of taxation revenue from it. So there's lots of different considerations to come from this at the moment.
So what do people do who are listening that might want to get involved? Are there any steps they can take?
Yeah, so if you go to our site, go to smartbettingclub.com/blog. I've got an article on there. It'll be up there until the 9th of February. There's a consultation going on with the Gambling Commission. They are encouraging end users to go and share their opinions about how gambling companies interact and what they should do in terms of vulnerable people and affordability limits. It's a shortened survey. It'll take 10 to 15 minutes of your time at best. And I've also encouraged people to write to their MP to encourage the separating the types of betting we talked about. And I've got a bit of a petition going on these points. So I was advised that's powerful if, we're putting together a point on this separation of the type of betting and some of these key points we talked about. If I had 1,000 people who agree, that's going to open the door a little bit more for that argument to be heard. So, there are things you can do if listening, and check out the site and go on the blog and read the article.
Very nice, very nice. Before I get you out of here, I want to ask, you started your own podcast, and I'm always curious, especially in the gambling space, why people do it and how it's going versus what they expected and any other learnings.
Well, I'm trying to follow in the footsteps of you, Jake. Not quite at 1.5 million downloads. a fair bit to go. I was reluctant at first, certainly, but I was encouraged by a few friends of mine, people that I know, who said, I've been on a few podcasts. You were kind enough to invite me on before to your podcast and a couple of other ones, and they encouraged me to give it a go. And certainly there were some interesting people that, you get the opportunity, as you'll know, to really have a deep dive into topics and explore people's process. I'm talking to a lot of professional bettors and tipsters and asking them the questions about what they do, how they break things down, how they found value, how they see things, how they adjust to COVID times and how they handle losses and their take on the bookmaking and betting world. So don't really get that opportunity in the written format, certainly to get into that detail. As a nice kind of conversation and an easy chat, it's amazing what you can teach people. So I found it really rewarding and very educational for me to do. So from a purely selfish point of view, I find it enjoyable, and I suppose it's nice that people enjoy it too and download it. But it's good fun. Like I say, getting into a bit more detail as well is really helpful. Yeah,
I can concur with that. So before I get you out of here, tell everyone where they can find the podcast as well as the website and Twitter handle so they can follow along. And obviously, if they want to get involved on the UK reg side of things and go through the survey, the petition and stuff like that, they'll have the information they need.
Yeah, so you can find us at smartbettingclub.com. Go to the blog for the details on the UK reg stuff. Again, podcast directories are most of them, iTunes and Apple and Spotify. Just search for Smart Betting Club. And you can find me on Twitter at SBC Info. Welcome potential to chat with different people, listen to different views, and get in touch if you've got any questions.
Awesome, Pete. Appreciate you coming back on the show. It's always fun to chat, and hopefully we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Jake.